Hello everyone, welcome to my first Tides of Destruction Age of Sigmar video battle report. I've done quite a few Age of Sigmar written battle reports, which if you're interested in you can find on my blog, Tides of Destruction, which is linked below the video here. I'm going to give it a shot doing some voiceover work with the photos because I think it's a little bit better to explain where my head was at during the game, what I was thinking, what my opponent may have been thinking, things like that than I can do in written form. And also hopefully it's a little bit less of a slog to get through a video than it is to write everything down just the way I want to and everything like that. So please bear with me. If you have any comments or questions or anything like that, feel free to drop me those in the YouTube video. I'm very responsive to criticism, and we'll go ahead and get into the lists for the 2,000 point game that I played this week. So we'll start off with my list. I'm playing Mixed Destruction. This is a 2,000 point game. Mixed Destruction versus pure Seraphon, so using Order Allegiance. I'm taking a bit of a variant on the typical Frostlord on Stonehorn, backed up by 3 Huskar on Thundertusk list. The more popular build is to get some kind of mage in there to have access to Mystic Shield, and then put a bunch of Grots in there to clog up the board and keep things off of the Thunder Tusks, as well as hold objectives. Unfortunately, I don't have 3 units of Grots. I only have 2 units of Grots, and I also wanted to test a list out that I might be taking to an upcoming tournament this week. So I was playing with what I had. In this case, I took 3 units of Savage Orcs, just with Champas, as my battle line, and I also put in a Cunning Ruck Battalion. I had some points left over because you save about 50 points for a typical Moon Clan Grot unit when you downgrade to a Savage Orc unit, so I ended up having about 150 points to spare even after getting my mage in there. So I decided to go with the Cunning Ruck Battalion because I wanted the extra item, and I also wanted to have fewer deployments. One of the things I think is most powerful in the game right now is being able to dictate who goes first and who goes second in a game. Typically you'll play for the double turn if you can do that, so I wanted to have a lot less deployments than I would normally have with the list that everybody takes. So, this list allows me to drop out the battalion in one go, and then I have a lot of characters, but it's still almost, I think, half the deployments that the typical list is. Everything else is pretty standard. I go with Blood Ravens on the Thunder Tusks because an automatic mortal wound from really far away is really powerful. Went with the Moon Clan Grot Shaman because they're pretty undercosted for what they do, honestly. Their profile spell is really good into some armies if you can roll it well, and they're a good Mystic Shield bot, and also pretty easy to keep alive if you just leave them in the back there. I also took Rampager as my trait, pretty common for this kind of army. I'm going to be very aggressive and try to get my units into my opponent as quickly as possible while doing a whole bunch of shooting onto their most powerful targets. The list is not particularly good at objectives. It doesn't have a lot of bodies, which is the one thing you definitely lose when you change from Grots to Savage Orcs. So I need to be a lot more aggressive on scenario and get more in my opponent's face than I normally would, because I have to be able to take that ground and keep them off of my side of the board from ever getting any kind of scenario presence. That can backfire depending on what you're playing against, but that was kind of my basic idea with the army list. Now we'll have a look at my opponent's list. I was playing against Kyle, a guy who's pretty regular at one of the shops that I frequent. He was bringing a pure Seraphon order list. Putting his list together for this video, it looks like he was about 20 points over, as well as had an illegal battalion for the Eternal Star Host. I've augmented his list here to be 3 units of Saurus Guard. He actually played with 2 units of 10 Saurus Guard. I'm pretty sure it was just a miscalculation on his part, so I don't think there was any shenanigans going on or anything like that, but the rest of the list is all what it should be. It's the Eternal Star Host, which is the really tanky Saurus Guard, backed up by the hero, to have really good armor saves and just generally be really good at taking a charge and really hard to shift. Obviously, their big weakness is they're kind of expensive per the amount of wounds that you get, but they fight really well, and they can get where you need them to because of the drummers that pretty much all Saurus units have. To flavor that up, he took an Engine of the Gods, a Stegodon, a Bastiladon, and then a smattering of characters. So pretty good list all around. Definitely not super top tier competitive list or anything like that, but a good all around list. He has some things to do in every phase of the game. Star Priest can definitely make one of those units of Saurus Guard a little bit tankier. -1 to hit with a 2+ armor save, ignoring Ren 1 is really difficult to shift for many armies. He also has some Ripperdactyls in there to kind of be a nice flanking unit, maybe do some War Machine or Wizard hunting, something like that. And then the Monster Mash is there to provide some shooting, and Wells just get in the way because Bastiladons are pretty tanky, and Stegodons are reasonably tanky. They don't have as many wounds as some other monsters do, but they're not too bad still. Overall, my plan when I saw Kyle's list was to take out the heroes to deny the Saurus Guard their ability to get all those nice armor bonuses. One bonus comes from the Eternity Warden being close to them, and then the other one comes from just any hero being close to them. So if I can take out the Eternity Warden, kind of deletes both of those bonuses in one go, and then the unit becomes very mediocre. And that's probably the biggest weakness of this type of list, is keeping those characters safe from shooting and magic. I'm not too worried about the monsters or anything like that. My monsters are quite a bit fightier. I have Thunder Tusk to be able to snipe one of those Stegodons down in a whole turn if I need to. Generally, the amount of mortal wounds that my list can output is a very big counter to what he is bringing, so I just need to make sure that my Thunder Tusk stay nice and healthy, stay in the back, let the rest of the army do their thing, and they keep pushing out the shooting until I can just inevitably grind him down. So we'll start here with deployment. In the future, I'm going to try to get some more back and forth pictures of deployment because I think it's actually one of the more important phases, and a lot goes into deploying an army well. But I have some pictures of the table layout. Please excuse the shadow. One of the only tables that was open and appropriately fantasy themed was getting some direct sun at the time we played. You can see his Kyle's Ripperdactyls on the side there. My orcs are kind of on my flank, and my monsters are more in the middle. I started placing my monsters first because I wanted the option to be able to place the battalion all at once while baiting out as many of Kyle's drops as I could get. So I started with one unit of orcs, and then I kind of went into the monsters. So the monsters are all going to stay in the center. They can redeploy very easily because they all have good movement values, and they all get extra movement from the Destruction Allegiance trait as well as Rampager. So my only worry was putting the Frostlord into place where he can get a charge off on turn 1, because obviously he's a lot of points, and I want to get him in there as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, Seraphon are pretty good against Frostlords. They ignore the rend on his spear. They don't ignore the rend on the horns for the most part, but the spear is probably his second best weapon. You can get bogged down a little bit if they start making some good armor saves. So I definitely wanted to make sure I get him into the appropriate targets. I also have my big boss and another unit of orcs on my left flank. They're just kind of there to act as scenario grabbers, and I was running out of room, so I didn't really have many other places to put them. Kyle did a pretty standard deployment. Monsters are all together, sort of a little bit farther back of the deployment line. I think he believed that I was going to go first because he mentioned several times how the Frostlord can, charge from really, really far away. He was asking the range of my guns, things like that. So he put the knights in front of them. I believe thinking that they would be some kind of shield for the monsters, and then he could kind of bog me down and hit me with what he needed to, whether it be shooting or whatever's going on as well. Some of his heroes are behind that yellow building in the center, and then he has his 2 blocks of Saurus Guard with the Eternity Warden kind of hanging out on the middle right from my perspective. Once we got all done deploying, my plan was to ignore the Saurus Guard if possible. I like to put things like the Blood Ravens into them just to pick them off here and there, but they're pretty difficult to shift before I can get the heroes out of there. They take a charge really well because they go to D3 damage if they haven't moved instead of 1 damage, and then they already have a pretty good attack profile. So I didn't really want to get into them. I more wanted to redeploy my army so that I was going to fight the Saurus Knights as well as the monsters, and then delay the Saurus Guard until I could get rid of all of that, then turn and fight that with the rest of my army. Again, also don't really care about the Ripperdactyls. They don't have many great targets in my list. They have pretty much the Wizard or the Big Boss. Big Boss is on the completely other side of the board from them, so it's going to be very difficult for them to get over there without eating a charge from something, and they're pretty delicate in melee. They hit very hard, but they don't take a punch very well. And then my Wizard is kind of chilling out on that wheat field at the back, so if they try to get him, I can pretty easily bubble wrap him or put something in the way that's going to make that difficult for him to get into. So I wasn't worried about them either. My big priority targets are definitely going to be those heroes and those monsters so that I can get shooting dominance and take away his armor saves so that those Saurus Guardians aren't going to be tanking my Frost Lord for forever while I just can't get through them. So because I was able to out-deploy the Seraphon army in terms of being finished first, I gave Kyle the first turn. He seemed a little surprised by this because he'd been talking about all the things that my army can do on turn 1, all the places I can reach, things like that. So I definitely wanted to give him the first turn, not only because I thought it was advantageous to myself to be able to see where he would move and what he would do, but also because he seemed a little mentally unprepared for it, and that would cause him to have to think a little bit more. So in the Seraphon hero phase, Mystic Shield goes up onto the Saurus Knights, and then the Skink Star Priest uses the Venom Spite Staff or something like that to give the Saurus Knights an additional bonus onto their Jaws attacks. The Engine of the Gods rolls to see if it gets any cool effects. I believe it was one of the damage ones, and I'm not close enough for that, so it effectively does nothing. We did agree before the game that if he rolls any of the results that add a unit to the board or anything like that, that it would just roll the result below that, because obviously he doesn't have any reinforcement points, so it's kind of a wasted roll, and I'm okay with that. I hope they change that model anyways, because it doesn't really work with matched play very well. In the movement phase, the Saurus Knights march up onto the left center objective from my perspective, and the monsters move up a little bit as well. The Saurus Guard actually back up and pull towards the center a little bit more. Kyle stated that his reason for doing that was he was afraid that I was going to be able to just blow up those units between my guns and gain Frostlord into them and all that kind of stuff. So he wanted to use them more as a countercharge unit and get me into maybe something that could tank a little bit better and was a little bit more resilient. So this kind of plays into the game plan that I had going in after the deployment, which was to delay or ignore the Saurus Guard, blow up his monsters and his heroes, and then kind of deal with them while hopefully, swinging the scenario in my favor. So all in all, that was a good thing for me. The Ripperdactyls fly up the flank as fast as they can without running. They are aiming for a long charge into the Savage Orcs on my right flank. I believe we saw that it was about a 10-incher, but they don't have any real better targets other than my couple of ground-based heroes or those Savage Orc units, because volume of attacks works very well against Savage Orcs. They don't have very good saves. They're more tanky based on their wound profile, so getting the Ripperdactyls into them is definitely a good thing to try. The Saurus Knights also moved up onto the objective to go ahead and camp that. In the shooting phase, the Bastiladon is out of range, and the Stegodon with its big crossbow is pretty much the only thing he has that's in range. So that shoots into my blue Thunder Tusk, dealing 5 wounds to it. Not that bad of an outcome. but I definitely need to heal him back up for at least 3 wounds so that his Frost Blast is going to do a full 6 mortal wounds instead of d6, which is obviously quite a big difference. So my hope is that I can get that done on my turn, and then also still have a Thunder Tusk left over to put the reroll 1s to wound prayer onto the Frost Lord, because that gives him 2 pluses to hit on almost all of his attacks and 2 pluses to wound on almost all of his attacks, actually all of his attacks, rerolling 1s, so he's brutally efficient in that case. In the charge phase, the Ripperdactyls end up failing their charge. They needed like a 10, like I said. I think they rolled like a 4 or something very poor, so now they're kind of open to a counter charge and probably not going to accomplish too much in the game regardless of what happens. So would have been nice if you made that charge, but even in that case, I don't mind sacrificing quite a bit of those Savage Orcs. My plan was to just get my Red Thunder Tusk into them after that and delete that unit, and also go over and take that objective. With the Saurus Guard having backed up, the right middle objective is essentially mine for the taking. It's going to be very difficult for Kyle to get anything onto that, so that's a free 2 points a turn once I can go ahead and score that. With that, there's no combat or anything. I didn't have to make any battle shocks, so we go over to my turn. So now we go over to my turn. Pretty standard start. I drink my Battle Brew for both my Big Boss and my Frostlord, just 1 sip, because neither of them needs to take 2 sips pretty much ever. I don't want to take those extra mortal wounds. I start by doing some healing onto the blue Thunder Tusk. Unfortunately, I roll really poorly. All of the healing prayers do go off, as they only need a 2+, because I positioned my Thunder Tusk in such a way that they were all within not only 18 inches of each other, but 18 inches of the Frost Lord, so that I can get that bonus on their roll. But I rolled a 1 for both of my first 2 healing rolls, leaving the Blue Thunder Tusk with 3 wounds taken, so I need to heal him for 1 more wound. I had a decision to make between doing that or putting the rerolls to 1 in combat prayer on the Frostlord. Ultimately, I decided to go with another heal, which got the Thunder Tusk back up to only 1 wound taken. The Frostlord should be okay on his own. I mean, he's still very combat effective, so it's not that much of a loss. Also, I'm going to be putting most of my army into the targets that I can get into this turn, so it should be more force than I require. So it's not like I need to balance the odds in my favor to take out a particular target by, edging those ones to wound out. I go ahead and throw up the Frostlord's command ability to be able to re-roll failed charges on, or just charges in general, on my Beastclaw Raiders units, and then I go with my destruction movements, moving pretty much everything up the board. The Red Thunder Tusk and the Orc unit on the right flank go and towards the Ripperdactyls. Everything else kind of goes up the middle left flank. I'm definitely aiming for those Saurus Knights with most of my army, but I want to get the Frostlord in position to charge into them if I need him, or to maybe get into the Stegodon if I don't feel like I need him in the combat with the Knights. So I definitely want him to have some choices and make sure that he's going to have a target no matter what, because he's probably the centerpiece of my army, and I definitely need to get in combat with him. I move the right Orc unit into range of the building on their side, which is a mystical building. I did this on purpose because there's only a 1 in 6 chance they're going to be stupid, but I'm going to charge them into the Ripperdactyls most likely, and I want them to have the reroll to wound so that they can do a little bit more damage over there. Unfortunately, I do end up rolling the 1, so it's going to be kind of the Thunder Tusk by himself taking them on. Using the Cunning Rook Battalion movement, I move the Big Boss up a little bit more. I'm trying to play very aggressive with him compared to my normal army, which is the Arrow Boys version of the Cunning Ruck, where he kind of stays back for dear life and just tries not to die. He has Battle Brew in this game, so he's 5 attacks, 2s and 2s, -1 Rend, 2 damage, which would be a lot more effective against non-Seraphon, because most of their units ignore Rend 1 because of their really good shields. But I still want him to get in there. He also has the awesome ability of when he attacks, I can then pile in an attack with a unit of orcs near him, so I can kind of get more attacks before Kyle will be able to activate one of his units. So that all moves up without much of a hitch. In the movement phase, I just keep moving on up. The Frost Lord puts himself kind of between the Bastiladon and the Knights, and a long charge will get him into the Stegadon with the crossbow or the Engine of the Gods, so he has quite a few targets available to him. I'm holding the center with my painted orc unit just so I can use them as kind of a screen and delay the Saurus Guard when they inevitably start coming back up, and then I'm pushing really hard to the left with my Thunder Tusks, kind of making sure that they're well screened from any charges, because the Stegadons hit pretty hard in combat. Bastiladon's not too shabby either, and I don't want to get into a situation where they're taking a bunch of wounds and then I'm having trouble keeping up with the healing in terms of turning their guns into the most effective it can be, and also keeping my Frost Lord up. Nothing really runs. I want to do a lot of charges this turn, so I believe the painted orc unit ran, but that's and then obviously the Frost Lord, because he can still charge after he runs. In the shooting phase, I put the red Thunder Tusks Frost Blast into the Ripperdactyls, killing 2 of them. The green and the blue Thunder Tusk put their shots into the Engine of the Gods, killing it. Generally, the Engine of the Gods is not that scary. It's kind of a poorly written war scroll, but there is an option for it to roll an extra turn if you roll trip 6s. I could have put only one of the blasts into it and remove that, because at that point I would only get to roll 2d6, but I just decided to go ahead and kill it because they don't get much weaker when you start wounding them. So instead of putting 6 damage on the Stegadon and putting 6 damage on the Engine of the Gods, I reasoned it was just better to just kill one of them off. I also put a couple wounds into a few of his heroes. I believe one on the Star Priest and one on the Sunblood, as well as one into the Knight unit from the Blood Ravens. I was trying to put most of the Blood Ravens into the Saurus Guard, but didn't roll the 4+ I need to pick my own target. And then on the last one, I just decided to go into the Saurus Knights so that I could, pre-damage them a little bit. In the charge phase, I go ahead and charge into the Saurus Knights with the Frost Lord, the Big Boss, unit of Orcs, and 1 Thunder Tusk. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough surface area for me to get both of the Thunder Tusks in there, so the green one, I believe, just kind of hung back. Was it the green one? Let me check, actually. Let me update these pictures here. No, it was actually the blue one that hung back. That's my mistake. So anyways, big combo charge into that unit. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to get rid of them. They are immune to Battle Shock. I forgot to say earlier that they were Inspiring Presence. But I should be able to kill them, with relative ease. I wanted to get the Frost Lord into the Stegadon because he would kill that no problem, and then 2 out of 3 monsters are down, which is a great place to be, but unfortunately he needed something like a 9 to get into it, and something like a 6 or a 7 to get into the Knights. I ended up rolling a 7 on the first one, and I just decided to stick with that charge result because if I re-roll it and I get like a 3 or a 4 or something, and he doesn't make it into anything, that puts me into a really bad spot. So didn't want to be greedy with that. In the combat, I start off with the Frost Lord. He kills quite a few of the Saurus Knights. I believe we were under the impression that they ignore Rend -1 and Rend -2. Having looked that up subsequently, that is not the case. They only ignore Rend -1, so the Frost Lord should have done quite a bit more damage with his with the Stonehorn's horn attacks, because they're Rend -2, and they do 3 damage apiece, which is just devastating because the Saurus Knights only have 2 wounds. So did less damage than I should have. The Knights ended up attacking back, doing some damage into, I believe, the Orc unit, killing 2 of them. And then I fight back with the Big Boss and the Orcs and the Thunder Tusk, and at the end of the day, he has his champion left with 1 wound on him. So didn't quite manage to wipe that unit out. My Frost Lord is disengaged from the combat, as is no everything. The orcs, the big boss, and the Thunder Tusk are still engaged because they're still within 3 inches. I also got a charge off with my Red Thunder Tusk into the Ripper Dactyls. Rolled really poorly in that, so I didn't end up doing anything to him, and he did 1 wound back to me for my trouble. The Ripper Dactyls are also holding that objective on the right. Since he got there first, the objective is his, and I wasn't able to kill that Ripperdactyl off, so the objective remains his, which is kind of annoying because I definitely wanted to get that one and then use the Red Thunder Tusk to pivot back to the center and get some shooting done, but wasn't to be. I end up not having anything run from Battle Shock for my own guys, and then his knights are immune to Battle Shock, and the Ripperdactyls are Bravery 10, so they don't care about the 2 casualties that I inflicted. Seraphon very high bravery, obviously, being benevolent demons, so it's very difficult to break them. They also typically don't run big units like Khorne or Nurgle and some of those armies do, so it's just they're generally immune to Battle Shock in most cases, so the amount of casualties they took wasn't very important at the end of the day. Also forgot to mention that my Garrote Shaman puts Mystic Shield onto the Frost Lord just in case I don't get the turn next turn. He also wasn't in range to try any kind of Mystic Bolt or Arcane Bolt or Curse of the Bad Moon or anything like that, so didn't have any opportunity to do those. Okay, so after my turn, we rolled for initiative. I ended up winning that initiative roll, taking the double turn as well, because I reasoned that I'm already doing pretty well, having killed some big pieces of the Seraphon army, and I think that I can kill the remaining big pieces that I care about, and then bring my game plan to fruition of ignoring the guard, killing everything else, getting up on scenario, and then moving forward from there. Right now, I only control my own objective, but only 1 knight stands between me and the left objective, and only 1 Ripperdactyl stands between me and the right objective, both of which should be relatively easy to take out, on average. So I was hoping that I could, get 3 objectives at least, kill a bunch of Kyle's army, and then be in a very dominating position. So to that end, I put Mystic Shield back up on the Stonehorn. The Stonehorn uses his command ability. Briefly thought about doing Inspiring Presence on one of the Orc units, but opted for the more aggressive play because I thought I could make something happen with the Thunder Tusks if I needed to, depending on how the shooting phase goes and all that kind of stuff. One of the first things I did was to use the Kunninruck battalion to have the big boss attack the Knight Champion, Saurus Knight Champion. He managed to kill him off, rolling really well. So that means that now my Green Thunder Tusk, my big boss, and my Orc units are all free to move up because of order of activation stuff. I can do that before rolling for Rampage and Destroyer, which is awesome. So then I get to Rampage and Destroyer them all forward, staying out of range of the mystical ruined building that was near the Saurus Knights, just because don't really care about rerolling wounds on the targets over there, so I just want them to be able to act competently. Made it so that I would need a little bit longer of a charge into the Stegodon. They're kind of my insurance policy in case the shooting does not take the Stegodon down, because he's the juiciest target left for my mortal wound guns. But I'd rather have a backup policy than nothing else going on. In the movement phase, I kind of positioned the Thunder Tusks and the Frost Lord to get a combo charge onto whichever one of the monsters survives or that I need to get into. Pretty much as nothing else moves, I move the green Orc units to form like a Congo line to keep the Saurus Guard from going around the building into the center of the field. I don't think they're going to do that anyways, but it also threatens that they can easily get onto Kyle's objective if the Saurus Guard move away from it, so that was a good position for them, and I don't need them to do anything else. In the shooting phase, I go ahead and put 6 mortal wounds on the Stegodon with one of the Thunder Tusks, and then also use the other one to snipe out the Skink Star Priest, who was not hugging the building as tightly as the Sunblood was. Definitely want him to go down, just because don't want anything unbound, and I don't want to deal with the -1 to hit spell. Would have preferred to get the Sunblood, but unfortunately I didn't have the line of sight. The Red Thunder Tusk kills the Ripperdactyl he's in combat with, and I believe the Blood Ravens kill a couple Eternal Guard and put a wound onto, I think the Eternity Warden. There's some just miscellaneous wounds floating around at this point. So now this means that I have secured both the left and the right objectives, which was a big part of my game plan this turn. Going into the charge phase, I charge the Frost Lord into both the Stegodon and the Bastiladon. I put his mortal wounds for charging into the Stegodon, nearly killing it. And then I put his Frost Spear and his horns into the Stegodon as well, put the punches and kicks and the hooves into the Bastiladon, reasoning that I definitely want to finish the Stegodon off, and putting high rend attacks into the Bastiladon is not really going to get me anywhere. It's also far worse in combat than the Stegodon is, so I don't really care if it lives. I didn't manage to get in with I managed to get in with the big boss and the orcs onto the Stegodon, and then nothing else charged. I didn't have room for any of the Thunder Tusks, nor the range to get them into any particularly desirable targets. I believe the green one tried to charge but failed it even with the reroll. It was quite far. So the Stegodon ends up going down from the Frost Lord. The Bastiladon takes a few wounds, but nothing major, and then does nothing back. Rolls pretty badly for it, so we kind of just have a standoff there. And then that's the end of my turn, so I score 5 points, so it's now 5-0 for destruction. I control 3 of the objectives, and Kyle only controls his, and is kind of in a compromising situation with it as far as the scenario goes. I've now killed everything except for the Eternity Warden, the Source Guard, and the Sunblood. So very little army to fight back against me, which is what I was hoping to do. And then I pass the turn over to Kyle. So Kyle starts his turn. He uses the Sunblood's ability to call out a target, basically, which allows him to reroll hits, I believe it is, for Saurus units in combat against that target. He picks my Frost Lord because he's kind of trying to go all in and kill that thing now, as it's the big centerpiece of my army, as well as really the only thing he can get to. So that's all he has for the hero phase. There's, his wizard is dead and a couple other things going on. So he goes right into movement. The Saurus move as far as they can towards the Frost Lord. They're still in range of his objective because they're not super fast unless they're running. But one unit will be able to get a charge, as well as the Sunblood, and he does have Reckless for his command trait, so pretty decent odds that he gets in there. In the shooting phase, the Bastiladon shoots 10 shots, I believe, into the Frost Lord, puts a couple of wounds on it, I think 3 total. I failed 1 save from a Javelin and 1 save from a laser beam shot, so that's 3 wounds rounded down to 2, yeah. So that's all of the rest of his shooting for his army. In the charge phase, the Source Guard unit and the Sunblood managed to make it into the Frost Lord, and then the Bastiladon is already there, of course. He starts with the Source Guard, putting a few wounds onto the Frost Lord. I take the Frost Lord and dump most of his attacks into the Bastiladon to finish it off. I believe it had 3 or 4 wounds left. Just because I don't want to deal with the shooting, and it's another big centerpiece model. Also, the Source Guard are really good at tanking anything except for the mount horns because of their shield and their really good armor save, so I didn't really feel like throwing many attacks into them. Probably could have put some attacks into the Sunblood, but mostly just wanted the Bastiladon to go down. I think I put some incidental attacks into the Source Guard, which maybe killed like 1 of them on a bad armor save. But yeah, so Bastiladon goes down, and I think 1 Source Guard. The Sunblood strikes back. Oh no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Sunblood, it was the Eternity Warden. Yeah, the Sunblood went down and charged a unit of my orc, so it was acting as a screen. That's my mistake. So yeah, the Eternity Warden does I think maybe 1 wound or something like that to the Frost Lord, nothing major. And then the Sunblood takes 3 wounds from the orcs. They roll pretty hot, and he kills quite a few of them back. I believe like 5 or something like that, because he's very good at chopping up infantry that is not very good at making armor saves. So with that, the only battle shock test to be made is on my unit. I pass it because orcs are bravery 7 in combat, so I believe I rolled like a 1 or 2 or something. My big boss and my other unit of savage orcs on the left were almost in range to pile in on the source guard, but I think they're about 4 or maybe 5 inches away, so they couldn't get involved in the combat like I wanted them to. We rolled for initiative again at the end of Kyle's turn. I won the initiative roll again and decided to give him the turn, just in the interest of having more of a fun, stabby game. So he got to double turn me, and we'll see what happened with that. So Seraphon turn 3, pretty much a carbon copy of the last turn. The Sunblood uses his Call Out a Foe ability again on the Frost Lord. The other unit of Saurus Guard moves forward to be able to get everybody into the Frost Lord, and then he does just that, making a pretty short charge from them onto him. So now the Frost Lord is fighting a weakened unit of Saurus Guard who have not moved, so their halberds are doing D3 wounds, a full unit of Saurus Guard, and the Eternity Warden, as in then the Sunblood is still in my orc unit fighting a kind of a who cares combat over there. So Kyle opts to start with the fresh unit of Saurus Guard, putting me at, I believe, my second profile. No, third profile on the Frost Lord. He's taken about, I think, 8 wounds at this point, something like that. I put all of my attacks into the Saurus Guard unit that has not moved because I want to make sure I wipe them out so that I don't have to deal with any kind of D3 wound shenanigans. Kyle rolls really bad for their armor saves. I believe the Frost Spear, he rolled triple 1s out of 4 of the saves I've forced on him, which is the only thing that they fail on for that, and that's 3 damage apiece, so that just blew up the unit, and I ended up wasting most of my attacks, but I didn't really see that coming. And then the Eternity Warden, I don't believe does much of anything. The Sunblood kills the Orc unit down to 1 man, just the Banner Bearer, who I keep to try to keep the unit around just for victory points purposes. I don't do anything back to the Sunblood, so he's fine. In Battle Shock, my last orc ends up running away, leaving the Sunblood kind of out in the open. And then the Frost Lord is still standing. Kyle doesn't have any battle shocks to make because I just blew up his 1 unit. He passes the turn over to me. We decide just to kind of go through it real quick. So all I do is we just roll for my 3 Thunder Tusk shots into his unit of Saurus Guard, into his Eternity Warden, and into his Sunblood. I hit with all of them, so that would leave him with, I think, like 3 Saurus Guard left on the table. We didn't even do the Blood Raven shots, so obviously I would have, then piled in everything, control all 4 objectives, and it's a pretty simple victory from there. So ended up being a game that ended on bottom of turn 3, major victory for Destruction. Next, I will give some thoughts on the game, both from my perspective and from Kyle's perspective, and hopefully dig into it a little bit deeper. So this game was kind of a blowout. I had a feeling it was going that way once I saw the army list that Kyle was bringing. I think it could have been quite a bit closer, but the biggest mistake of the game was I feel that Kyle was very unprepared to take the first turn. Didn't have a very clear game plan and didn't think through what his army does as critically as he could have. The Saurus Guard blocks were the units that I was most afraid of in his army. Obviously, I can chew through them with my mortal wounds from the Thunder Tusks, but they're needed against other targets as well. So it's not like I can just blow them up for no repercussion. If the Frost Lord gets into the Saurus Guard, only one of his weapons is very effective against them. That's the horns. So if he if he starts losing some profiles, those horn attacks go down, which means I can't put out as much offense against them, and I might end up being bogged down in that combat for a while. So I didn't think they could really kill the Frost Lord or anything, but I thought they could kind of hold him up, and that might give him the ability to use his monsters and some other things to actually get some work done against my army. Again, not something that I was really terrified of, but when going into any game, I'm always thinking, how can I lose? What does my opponent have that can beat me? And that was the clearest path to victory I saw if I was in Kyle's position. So when he took those units and backpedaled them, that's something I see a lot from players that don't have a lot of miniature wargaming experience, particularly in Age of Sigmar. There's not a lot of speed like there is in other games, so you can't redeploy quickly if you make those kinds of moves. That's why deployment is so important. So when he pulled that unit back, I knew that they weren't going to do anything for the first 2 turns of the game, at least, because he spent that 1 turn pulling them back, and then if I give him another chance, he's going to have to, if he marches them, they can't charge, so they're also not doing anything because they don't have any guns, and if he walks them, he's going to have probably some really long charges to make, even with Reckless rerolling those charges, so it's very likely they're not going to do anything until turn 3, and that's a significant portion of his army. And then, as I said, my plan was already, let's kind of delay or ignore them and kill everything else. So now I don't even have to worry about that. I don't have to feed them an Orc unit or 2. I don't have to feed them a Thunder Tusk, something like that, to keep them occupied. I don't have to do anything. So I ended up getting basically to fight against 100% of Kyle's army, or 50% of Kyle's army with 100% of my army, which is a really bad position to be in no matter what, especially when your opponent has a list that's probably advantaged over you. And then in this scenario, it was very bad as well because Seraphon usually a pretty elite style army. Their units are very tough but very expensive, so them being able to spread out and capture multiple objectives is very difficult, especially if the bulk of their infantry is staying back and doing nothing. So that was probably the turning point of the game, and that was at the top of turn 1. From there, I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the left flank, deal with these monsters, deal with these knights, and kind of go from there. Some other things that happened during the game, I think moving the knights so aggressively might have been a bad idea. It allowed me to get just a ton of units into them. I mean, I charged them with the Frost Lord, a Thunder Tusk, an Orc unit at full strength, and the big boss. If he'd pulled them back just a little bit, but still had them kind of in the game, I would have been able to get into them with my Frost Lord, but he's very unlikely to be able to wipe that unit, especially with their ignoring, red 1 shields and 2 wounds apiece, inspiring presence, all that fun stuff. And again, I'm not worried about them killing the Frost Lord, but I'm worried about them tying him up. So at that point, it forces me to think, okay, do I use some of the Thunder Tusk shooting to clear out some of these guys so that the Frost Lord can finish them off? Do I let him just fight it out with them for a while until I can get him some reinforcements? It would make me think more critically about the game. As it was, I saw that I could get a ton of units into that one Saurus Knight unit, which allowed me to put my shooting into other places. So that cost him the Engine of the Gods. Turn 1, making it effectively do nothing in the entire game. So it was just opening his unit up to more threats than he needed to, allowed me to play a little more greedily than I might otherwise have been able to. So if we kind of go back in time, and the Saurus Guard are advancing aggressively on my right flank, or my kind of right center, and the Saurus Knights moved up a little bit and are kind of screening the monsters, but aren't so far up as to throw caution to the wind, I have a lot of stuff coming at me at that point. Where am I throwing my offense? Am I pulling away from a certain part of the board? Something like that. That's what you want to be doing as far as forcing your opponents to make decisions, think critically about the game. As it was, I basically got to do whatever I wanted, and just the end result was, I tabled my opponent having lost a unit of orcs. That was it. That was the only thing I lost the entire game. I didn't even. I mean, the Frost Lord had some wounds taken, but I could have easily healed those back up. So I lost 100 points to kill 2,000 points. That's when that happens. Even if your opponent has a better list than you, there were something that went very drastically wrong during the game. I mean, if the Saurusgar were more involved in the game, he could have made it so that I couldn't go get that right objective so easily. I couldn't have punished the failed charge on the Ripperdactyls as easily, because if I move a Thunder Tusk over there to charge them or shoot them, he's going to be able to charge the Thunder Tusk with the Source Guard, and Source Guard are pretty good in combat. Like Thunder Tusk, only has a 4+ save, -1 to hit in combat is very good, but he can bring a lot of attacks to bear against me. So I would have probably had to just abandon that side of the board, and then we would be even on scenario, and then it would create a situation where I'm kind of fighting on his left flank, he's sweeping around through my right flank, and then we kind of end up fighting in the center, which again I think would still go my way, but it would have been a much closer and probably more enjoyable game for the both of us. So again, that's pulling back with the unit is almost never the correct thing to do. It's a mistake I see a lot of people make, because they're afraid that they have this really awesome unit or an important unit, and they see that something bad is going to happen to it. If something bad is going to happen to it, pulling it back is not going to fix that. It's going to delay it. And it's not like you're going to have your opponent not do anything with the resources they were going to apply to that unit anyways. If it's guns, the guns will find something else to shoot. If it's something that's going to be in range to charge, they'll probably find something else to charge. You could charge pretty far in Age of Sigmar. Most combat units that are dedicated combat units can cover a lot of ground. That's one of their strengths. So if you kind of pull back from taking a punch by your opponent's army, they're just going to punch you somewhere else. So that's probably the biggest takeaway for this game for me is, don't play overly cautiously, especially if you have a very elite army or you feel like you're probably down from the outside of the game. If you feel like you're down from the outside of the game, you have to gamble. You have to take risks. After all, Age of Sigmar, it's dice at the end of the day. I could roll real bad. Kyle could have rolled really well. And if he played very aggressively and put himself in that position to win, he has a chance to win the game. If he doesn't even give himself the chance to roll those dice, make me roll those dice, there's no chance that he's going to win. So yeah, we talked about the game afterwards. That was the thing I brought up immediately. He completely agreed that the Source Guard probably could have been a somewhat effective tar pit for the Frost Lord, just because of what they do as far as their armor save and their shields. But he didn't do that, and he said that if we play again, which I'm sure we will, that he would be significantly more aggressive with those Source Guard, and I was happy to hear that, because I think we would have had a closer and more enjoyable game if that had been the case. So thank you for watching. Sorry that my first battle report was kind of one-sided. My games have been a little bit like that lately. I've been practicing really hard for a big tournament that is coming up soon, so I've been taking harder lists. This was not my best list that I'm capable of bringing, but it's certainly still a very powerful list. I will be doing battle reports for an upcoming tournament. I'm hoping those will be some really awesome games. It's going to be 4 people at the culmination of a league, so do look for those. They should be coming up sometime relatively soon as of the upload date of this video. The tournament is actually this week, so hopefully some closer, more tactically enjoyable games, but I thought this one was worth putting up just because it allowed me to illustrate a point as to what happens when you kind of play a little too tentatively, or don't play to your outs, as I like to say, and that's probably a good lesson if you're just getting into wargaming or getting into Age of Sigmar. If you feel like you're down, always play to your outs, and you'll at least give yourself the best chance of winning that you can. Thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to drop a comment or anything like that underneath the video. I'm pretty good about taking criticism and dealing with any kind of back and forth feedback, and I hope to have some more battle reports up here for you guys in the near future. Thank you.